guys, Luis Villasenor here from Ketogains, and today we are interviewing our friend Tyler Cartwright from Ketogains as well. How are you, Tyler?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine.
We are in the process of the early registrations for our Las Vegas seminar. We are finalizing some additional speakers that we haven't been, I guess, free to announce at this point. We are working on it slowly, but we will get those announcements out there. But definitely Dr. Jacob Wilson, Robb, Ryan Lowery, Shawn Wells, all of these guys are going to be out there. Craig Preisendorf. Speaking about the context of a ketogenic diet, it's going to be a lot of fun. Q&A sessions in between afterwards, lots of different vendors, the folks from Vespa, the folks from Keto Sports, I think are going to send some product out there and some information. We're going to have a large representation from the ketogenic community, and specifically from within the context of a ketogenic performance community across all the spectrum, right? So, definitely would love to have you guys check it out. You can get the information at ketogains.com as a website. From the Facebook group, there's some information available there. Instagram, Twitter, carrier pigeons. I think at this point we've gotten all the mobility out there. So definitely, if you need to reach out to us, and we'll make sure that you get the info that you need.
Okay, so thank you, folks. And now we're going to talk about a topic that is like a myth in mostly or all keto communities. People love to hate on protein practically, and they forget that, that protein is practically what we are all human beings made of. Mm-hmm. So Tyler, why don't you explain us or your thoughts on why the fear of protein is so big on keto communities?
So I have a dog. My dog can bite. My dog doesn't bite. Just because something can do something doesn't mean that it will do something. Just because a car can explode doesn't mean that it will explode, unless it's a 1973 Ford Pinto. You've got to kind of bear in mind that biochemically speaking, things can do different things in the presence of other things. And I know that's a really vague generalization, but we have a situation in the community where there are a lot of people who are doing ketogenic diets for weight loss or for fat loss more specifically. And the approach that they want to take is that lowers or keeps the insulin levels low. And they don't take any context into it with respect to, well, what's happening to glucagon? What's happening to fat, to blood glucose? And where is that blood glucose coming from? And so they start testing their blood, and they see that, oh, when I eat protein, my ketone levels go down, my blood glucose goes up, therefore protein is turning into glucose. And honestly, the evidence really doesn't support that. I mean, when we look at the research data, and admittedly we need more research data, when we look at it, that doesn't seem to be true. Just because protein can be anti-ketogenic or can be a trigger for insulin spikes doesn't mean that's all it does, I guess is the best way to put that.
Okay, sure. Then I'm going to go back and see how I frame it. Mm-hmm. And then probably you can chime in with your thoughts.
Sure.
From what I've gathered, managing on, being in low-carb communities for all this time is people are or have a very basic understanding of first what a ketogenic diet is. Mm-hmm. And what most people understand of what a ketogenic diet is okay, low in carbohydrates, high in fat. And when they read that, they go by the famous ketogenic ratio or percentages. So they think that to stay in a ketogenic diet and maintain ketosis, they have to have high fat. Mm-hmm. And then this drives them to lower protein because they are looking to maintain a 70 or over that percentage of fat calories, right? Mm-hmm. And then they think that they have to stay on that ratio to actually lose weight. So you have a two-found problem. First, they want to maintain a ketogenic ratio. They keep a protein low because of maintaining the ratio or have no regards whatsoever to actual protein intake. Mm-hmm. And then they think that if they disrupt ketosis, they are going to gain weight.
Sure. The one thing that I'll say is when we consider the ketogenic ratio that was developed for epileptic children with intractable seizure disorders and those kinds of things, the one challenge that people don't seem to get when they read the data is that they were kept uber low protein with a consequence. As these children grew up, or as they got older, they were smaller than the other kids. They were sick more frequently than the other kids. The treatment here is not without side effects, right? And the side effects typically come from the absence of sufficient protein in the diet, but it's the lesser of two evils, right? I mean, ultimately, it's preventing seizures, which are markedly worse than my kid being 4'11" instead of 5'1".
Exactly. And then this extrapolates to some of the usual myths that are prevalent as well in ketogenic diet, that they will cause osteoporosis or kidney damage or etc. that happened to these children not because they were doing a ketogenic diet, but because they were already ill and they were also on a very low protein diet.
It's really hard to take unwell or sick communities of people and extrapolate healthy population data. And it's one of the big challenges with epidemiologic research. So when they look at public policy data and say, okay, we polled 45,000 people and they sent all of their information to us and we've put it through the chipper shredder and this is the information that came out on the other side, you have to step back and say, well, what was the population that was being sampled, right? If the population that was being sampled were intractable epileptics who also have a litany of other health issues to go along with, it's not really fair to take that data and extrapolate that forward any more than it would be to take the TDEE of a lumberjack that still does manual lumberjacking and extract that backwards and say, so the soccer mom who, goes and does Pilates for 30 or 45 minutes a day needs to eat 7,500 calories to stave off muscle wasting, right? I mean, the context is changed, and because the context is changed, the recommendation has to change as well. We can't take data from epileptic children and cancer patients and neurological disorder patients and forward project that into an otherwise healthy population that's biggest issue may be insulin resistance, right? I mean, it's just two different things.
Exactly. So then returning to protein, what does this, how do we put 2 and 2 together in regards to the ratios and people thinking that they need to follow a magic ketogenic ratio, and how do we reconcile with protein in this case?
Sure. Well, two things I'll say. The first is I tell people all the time, absolute starvation is also ketogenic. I tell people, and they look at me like I'm nuts at first. I can eat a diet that's 90% carbohydrate and stay ketogenic. Guess how? I eat 100 calories a day. That doesn't make it healthy. That doesn't make it the right thing to do. And I think you alluded to it before when you said we're protein machines, or however it was you phrased that. That's a very true statement. All of our immune function, all of our hormone signaling, all of our transporter functions, all of the things that happen inside of us are protein driven. They're driven by breakdown of protein into amino acids and then the reformulation of those amino acids into things that we need. And so when you stay in sort of I don't know the right word here, when you stay at a very low protein level, right, you wind up, it's sort of like staying, mildly deficient in vitamin D. Over time, it's a bigger issue, but, in an acute sense, nobody's going to know because it takes months and years before you really start to see that symptom. I think the same thing is true with protein. And one of the biggest concerns I have with respect to ketogenic diets being done this way is, you're doing okay now. What's going to happen in 6 months? What's going to happen in a year? What's going to happen in 2 years when 30 or 40% of every pound you lost has been lean mass, and now you are wildly less metabolically active. And so you wind up in a situation where now you've got to eat 600 or 700 calories a day to preserve a weight loss, or, you can't eat more than 900 calories a day and you're trying to gain muscle.
Yeah.
It's problematic for sure.
Here's how I would explain it to people who are hearing us so that they can understand it a little bit better.
Sure.
Imagine that your body is made up of Lego blocks. So the main pieces are like from your head to your toes, whatever inside of your body, cells, muscle, bones, everything are Lego blocks. And the Lego blocks are proteins. So you take, let's say you eat a piece of meat. Your body takes that piece of meat and breaks down into the smallest blocks that are called amino acids and use them to make new pieces of you. Sure. Because every day because you're a living being, let's say that you break down a little bit of a piece. So you need, your body needs to get that new piece to probably make you bigger. Let's say you're exercising and you want to build muscle. You're going to need extra pieces, blocks, more amino acids. But also, as you age and as you live, you lose pieces because your body degrades naturally. So what happens is that if you get adequate protein, your body can complete itself or even build a bigger version of you in regards to, lean muscle or lean tissue. But if you eventually start not giving enough protein to repair and build, what happens is that you start getting little holes in your body. You lose stability, to call it one way. You start getting holes here, holes there. Eventually, as you said, you're not going to break in one day. But over time, you don't get 1 or 2 holes. You get to 10, you get 20. And then that is when you start seeing like illness or some issues. You start getting probably a loss of hair. You're getting weak. You don't know why. That's because you're missing some proteins. And as you said, proteins are not just muscle. People think, but I don't want to get strong. I don't want big muscles. No, proteins are not only for muscles. They're also for hormones, peptides. People confuse weight loss with, they just care about the actual weight loss. So when they start a ketogenic diet, as normally it is sold, meaning a high fat intake with no regards to protein or keeping it very low, yes, they lose total weight, but also some lean mass. Let's say that we have 2 persons, one that is not ingesting adequate protein and probably is losing, 10 pounds in 1 month. And then you have another one who is ingesting adequate protein also with strength training. And the other one probably just lost, let's say 4 pounds in 1 month in the same amount of time. If you were to look at the body composition of both of them, probably one lost more body fat than the other. The one that lost more weight just became a smaller version of that same person. It's what we call skinny fat. Just probably shrinked a little bit, but also like has the same body fat percentage. We've seen cases where they even have a bigger body fat percentage because, they lost total weight, but mostly from lean mass.
I always said muscle makes metabolism, and it's a really easy thing to remember. Your lean mass matters. I mean, so for example, I weigh 240 odd pounds right now. Me standing next to somebody who weighs the exact same amount as me but has 30 pounds less lean mass, what I can eat versus what they can eat are going to be radically different. Why? Because muscle moves metabolism. Muscle makes metabolism. It's metabolically very expensive to preserve lean mass. It's also, interestingly, very metabolically taxing to convert protein to glucose, which is a different discussion. But yeah, it's definitely crucial to make sure that you are consuming an adequate amount of protein. And Elise, I think you hit the nail on the head a minute ago. You said it's context dependent. It absolutely is. What's right for the 65-year-old person who's just training to try and stave off sarcopenia is a very different conversation than the 1% guy who's, already maxed out. He's competing for an MMA event. He's running ultras. He's doing whatever. In that scenario, the protein load is going to be radically different for that person versus, say the 17-year-old who could eat Twinkies and Ho-Hos all day long and still put on 15 pounds of muscle a year.
Exactly. Now that you touch on this subject, when we speak about adequate protein, normally what we would suggest on Ketogains is, of course, to use our Ketogains macro calculator. Mm-hmm. And going a little bit different from what you normally see on some other groups is we actually suggest that first you find out what your body fat percentage is.
Sure.
Because we said context, and your body, our calculator takes up your context of your body in account. So it's not the same someone who weighs 2,000 pounds and has a 40% body fat that for someone who weighs the same but has a 15% body fat.
Sure.
Protein requirements will be different because the one who is leaner has a bigger lean mass, for one. Then with that in account, you will calculate your total daily expenditure, and then you adjust protein intake, carbohydrate intake, depending on your insulin sensitivity or type of training, and then you make up the rest of your calories from fat grams, right? So this is so this is what we suggest in regards to actual protein intake for like most people. Mm-hmm. Just protein is what we say normally king. It's the most important macro. You have to hit your protein goal. And now there's another important thing to take in account, which is we don't have it on the calculator, but it's as more research comes along, it becomes that it's more important, especially as you touched a little bit upon it, on people who are even, let's call them grown adults or even elderly. Mm-hmm. Protein intake is the most important macro. When you talked about sarcopenia, for those that don't know, sarcopenia is the degrading of muscle mass that is supposed to be natural, but it can be, you can stop it. It doesn't have to be. You lose body mass because as you age, probably you lose a little bit of appetite, but also you exercise less. And you have to remember that if you don't use it, you lose it. If you want to avoid sarcopenia, the best way to do so is by doing some kind of strength training and ingesting adequate protein.
I've said before, we like our old people to be old. In sort of Western culture, when they hit like 50, 60, 70, it's like all of a sudden we move them from strength training programs or from, competitive athletics, like even if it's just like a rec league basketball game or something that they play every couple of days a week, to, here's your retirement condo and your shuffleboard game, and then we expect them to somehow maintain health. What we're finding from the research is twofold. One, protein requirements go up because people become less efficient at utilizing the protein that they're getting. It just digestive inefficiency happens as we age, not that it goes down. And then secondarily, to your point, Luis, appetite tends to decrease. So it's sort of this double-edged sword that cuts on both sides. It's, we're less efficient at using what we're being given, and in addition, we're taking in less. And by the way, we've set up a cultural environment where it's frowned upon for the 70-year-old to be in the gym, doing deadlifts with snatch grip at 315, 405. I mean, it's like, when did that become a bad thing to stay strong? When did it become a bad thing? And it's frustrating. And I mean, look, I'm not expecting every 70-year-old grandma to be running, Ironman marathons, or, every, 75-year-old grandpa to be posing in front of the mirror. But I am saying that contextually appropriate, adequate amounts of protein matter, and that age is one of those factors that has to be taken into account when we step back and say, okay, if we look at just the Ketogains recommendations of 0.8 to 1.0, 1.2, where do you fall on that spectrum? Well, what's your gender, what's your metabolic health, what's your age? All of those things have to factor into that equation. And honestly, personal taste has to factor into that too. Are you somebody that could live contentedly on nothing but sirloin the rest of your life? Or are you somebody that needs and thrives on some variety in your diet too? I think those are both things that have to be factored in.
Exactly. So, like to resume that part, probably if you are someone who is, let's say, over 40 years, what we would suggest is to get at least 30 or 25 up to 30 grams of high quality protein per meal, and hit your protein requirements. If you can manage to do so in one single meal, well, power to you. But probably it's going to be better if you distribute it in 2 or 3 meals, but hit your protein macro. And try to get at least 25 to 30 grams of protein in one meal.
We probably ought to explain why.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, in high quality proteins, in all proteins, but high quality proteins, we hope that's what you're eating. There is something called a leucine threshold, it's a specific amino acid that seems to drive protein resynthesis and repair. It is key crucial that we are bumping up against that on a regular basis so that the muscles are getting what they need. The amino acid pool is getting what it needs to make, to repair muscles, at least all the things that you talked about or that we talked about before. And what we found is, what we found, but what research has found, somewhere between 25 and 40 grams of actual protein. That's not 25 to 40 grams of meat. That's 25 to 40 grams of actual protein seems to be in that wheelhouse of space, as long as, again, to your point, it's high quality. It's animal based. It's beef, it's pork, it's chicken, it's fish. It's something that's quality, that it's not, a jug full of some kind of mix of pea protein and, whatever else. Right. So just to kind of touch on why that's I think an important thing to tackle as well. It's
Sure.
not just like steak.
Now, to that point, of course, always whole protein, that, as you said, a whole meal is going to be, a mixed meal is going to be better. But, worst case scenario, have the protein even in a shake. Yeah. We do not suggest that people live on shakes, of course, and I personally really just suggest shakes around training. But if you are one of those people that we talked about that have trouble with appetite, get your protein even if it's in a shake. It's going to be it's the less of two evils. It's more important that you actually get your protein in than how you take it. Now,
and one thing you can say is if you're not a big fan of whey shakes, or in terms of they wreck my insulin, or I have blood, you can either go full on casein or egg white or something that's a little slower metabolizing, or you can mix them together to get a slower digesting and absorbing protein, solely for the purpose of not spiking insulin. If that's a big concern of yours, whatever, you can work a shake or a regimen of shakes in if you need to get your protein. But the risk of not getting enough is vastly worse, according to the research, than the risk of getting too much. And I'll put that in air quotes.
Exactly. So to rephrase and touch a little bit on all the subjects we talked about, one would be there's no issue in consuming adequate protein. Remember that ketogenic diet should not be, or is not really high. High is context dependent. What we suggest is not high, is adequate to maintain and even increase a little bit lean mass if you are strength training, which is normally from 0.8 to 1 grams of protein per lean pound you weight. Some people, especially those that are going very low on calories, could increase to 1.2, but research and everything else doesn't point out to be beneficial. Now, on cases where you are a diabetic and have fear of raising insulin, etc., you have two options. One, as Tyler said, invest on protein that is not so insulinogenic. One would be casein. Casein protein is very slow absorbing, and it won't really impact blood glucose levels in the same way as whey protein. You could also experiment on yourself with different types of protein, because they affect each person differently. Some people get a high response from beef protein, others do so from pork. It really depends on if you take it alone or if you mix it with something else. Also, what we've seen with some people that are diabetics is that you should probably not be doing intermittent fasting and having 100 grams of protein in one meal. Probably you could start by spacing a little bit your protein intake. Have a meal with 20, 25, then 2 hours later or 3 hours later, have another with 20, 25, and increase gradually until you see better results. But not at the expense of reducing drastically your protein intake so that you start going way too low and getting issues, right?
So with respect to diabetics in general, it is kind of an interesting case, right? I mean, they're definitely the outlier as it relates to kind of looking at a protein distribution and why it matters, right? Type 1 diabetics are basically gluconeogenic monsters, and I mean that in the nicest of senses. They have no sufficient insulin response to challenge the glucagon response, and so they are consistently going to be creating higher amounts of glucose from everything that they take in, and that they have. Secondarily, type 2 diabetics are on the other end of the spectrum, which is to say, if they eat, again, using the term too much protein, anything that they do that raises blood glucose is going to be met with a massive insulin response. And so it's hard for glucagon to counteract that. And so you end up in a situation where you almost shunt fat mobilization, you prevent a whole lot of other things going on. And so those two are kind of the bounds in which we operate. But yeah, it's again, to drive home the point that you made, the intention here is to get contextually adequate amounts of protein, right? If you're someone who responds poorly to whey shakes, don't take them. Eat your meat. If you're somebody who doesn't like a lot of dietary protein, then figure out a shake regimen that works. I mean, but you've got to, one of our first seminar events, I made the statement that a ketogenic diet is any diet that's sufficiently low in carbohydrate to induce the body to create ketones. I've kind of added a comma at the end of that to say that also advances you towards your goals or your stated outcomes. Well, if your outcome is preserving lean mass, keeping your metabolism high, doing all the things that as human beings we want to do, protein drives all of that, right? I mean, ultimately finding that sweet spot or the way that works for you to get leucine right, to get total protein volume right, to do all those things right, has to be sort of tweaked and adjusted, which is one of the reasons I love our calculator, is that it gives you the latitude and the flexibility. It's not saying, here are your macros, eat these every day. It's saying, what are some basic contextual parameters that describe you as an individual, and then how do you then manipulate that to say, hey, you need to be on the lower end of protein because you're type 1 diabetic. Okay, we can work with that, just click a box, move a toggle down, do whatever. But ultimately, again, it's context specific for the individual, right? Somebody doing 3 hours of gym work 5 days a week needs a whole lot more protein than even I do, quite frankly.
Exactly. And then this brings us to what we like to say, which is don't chase ketosis, don't chase ketones, chase results. Because people are so fixated again on having a high ketone number when they don't even know what that means. You don't want really just to have high ketones because you want them. Ketones, for those that don't remember or don't know, are a byproduct of fat metabolization. So what happens is that you end up chasing ketones like most people do. You are just, for example, ingesting a bulletproof coffee or globs of fat just because you want to increase ketones. Yeah, probably you're burning the dietary fat that you ingested, but not your real body fat. And then you are afraid of eating protein because probably that number is going to go low. What will happen is that probably you're going to lose lean body mass. Just burn those extra fat that you ingested instead of attacking the real problem, which is, or what you would really want to do is to maintain your lean body mass or even build a little bit more and burn your own body fat. So you take that in context, really there's no sense in chasing high ketone readings. It doesn't give anything back.
Well, there's actually potential counter. and I don't want to dive too far into the science here because I'm the only person that cares about this stuff. I think it nerds me out a little bit. But that is, the higher that your ketone levels get, the body has a feedback loop to prevent diabetic ketoacidosis, which is when levels get so high that they're dangerous. And that is, it slows down the fat that you burn. So if your intention is fat loss or is weight loss and you're chasing high ketone levels, what you're really doing is continuing to bump against the ceiling where your body is saying, stop letting fat get burned, stop letting fat get burned, stop letting fat get burned, because it's constantly bounding itself to prevent itself from going, too far in any extreme, right? The body seems to crave homeostasis of being right in the middle.
Exactly.
Wherever it can. It craves metabolic flexibility to the extent that it can get it in any kind of dietary, scenario.
Yeah. So this brings us to another theme that we're going to talk probably about in the next, podcast video that we have. That is going to be probably fat flux and the classic myth of eat fat to burn fat. Mm-hmm. I think we will explain and take all the time to explain why it is not really important to eat all the fat that you want, and for weight loss. It doesn't work that way, but we will take, dissect that myth later on our next interview. So, Tyler, I think that's it for now. Is there anything else that you want to tell the guys from Ketogains?
So definitely, if you're interested in coming out to the biggest seminar, like I said, if you need additional information, if you need any information about the hotels, if you want to know about the speakers, definitely reach out to Luis or myself. We'll be more than happy to get you that info. One thing I would add is if you're not able to be there, but you want to continue to support what we're doing and what we're trying to move forward, we'll be sharing a link to a donation page through PayPal, probably Patreon as well, here very shortly, to try and help provide folks who believe in the mission of what we're trying to do and getting science and reason and logic firmly in the central point of a ketogenic diet, right? What does the evidence say, not what works for me? Help us to help you, I guess, would be the best message that I can give folks with. We want to continue to do these seminars. We want to continue to bring quality content. We want to make sure that we have, the resources at our disposal to put these types of events together and to put this type of content and information out there. Unfortunately, it doesn't, time is a bounded thing. It's a finite thing. So whatever we can do, collaboratively to try and help fund these efforts would be helpful. Just being completely transparent here. But, secondarily, again, if you're in the West Coast, if it's a day trip, a weekend trip, if you can get a relatively reasonable flight, the lineup that we've been able to put together for Vegas is insane. I mean, it's beyond anything that I would have ever expected. So definitely, guys, come check that out.
Perfect. So again, please come to Vegas if you are interested in the research and you want to support us and want us to keep doing seminars. If you want us to eventually go to, Europe or Canada or whatever, you have to support this seminar. Otherwise, we won't be able to keep doing them. So that's it. Thanks for joining us and see you later, folks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.